The Mercer Museum. Castle, fortress, or museum? It's always been a museum. You can read more about it. It's very impressive. Good morning, YouTube. Today I am here at the Mercer Museum, and we're gonna meet with a librarian and see if we can clear up some of the story of the legend of Tamenend, so that when I find his grave, I actually do right by the story, right? Because it's a bit of a legend. So let's see if we can separate fact from fiction, as they say.
Okay, this is your group, right?
Yes,
Okay.
we're just waiting for Maryland somewhere. And we're here.
I think the question is,
Mayor?
why would someone buy a boat like that?
You never know when this weather's coming.
That's true. Yeah, but you could use this one. See this one right here? Then why would you?
This place is pretty cool. This place is full of really interesting little artifacts, and not just little, huge artifacts. But I'm gonna go into this library and meet with the librarian. Alright, let's open the file. Wow, look at this. Thank you to the library and Clint and the librarians at the front desk. I have got my work cut out for me. So let's dig into these documents and see what I can discover about Chief Tamanend. Or shall I say, Sachem Tamanend. Can you read that? It's so delicate. Oh my god. Here's the backside in reverse. Look at this guy jumping off his cliff. From Sweden, the Swedish Splash. From Gothenburg, Sweden. That's so funny. Look at this beautiful letter from 1836. Gosh. Wow, look at the handwriting. Amazing. I'm gonna do my best to read it. Incredible. So in this letter from 1836, you see on this page the first mention of Heckwelder, and he says, this person was for many years the principal chief in the flock of Delawares and resided on the Nazareth tract in the town called Nalamica. When the brothers, the Moravians, who went to Nazareth, PA, purchased the manor, he was friendly to all white people. Yeah, I can't read that. In team away the brothers who invited him to reason as for the others to stay on the land. He then neighbors. But such was the wickedness of some people that came and settled in the parts, that a young Irishman with a gun meeting him on the road, parentheses, where, shot him dead. To keep you as to date, you may keep in mind that Captain George, I believe Captain George is somewhere mentioned up here. Well, we'll come back. Captain George was head of the Moravians, came to this county in 1741 or 42, that there were many Indian on the inhabitants in the county around Bethlehem, Allentown, and Nazareth. Defeat in 1755. In this last period may have Tamenend been killed. And it says in parentheses, you can see it says in parentheses right here, very old too, exclamation mark. Was taken for revenge upon his race. So I can't really read all of it, but it says, nephew of Saint Tammany. Death seems blah blah blah. Maybe you can read this if you want, but down here it says reconcile for, let's see, with the whole land history of the Indian as given by Heckenwelder. There's Heckenwelder again. Dash. Alas, the burial must be not, or must be attributed or to some other chief, exclamation mark. So that's the key. Heckenwelder. Alas, the burial must be for some other chief. Uh-oh. So, yeah, the dates don't really add up according to the sources, do they? So this is the Watson letter by Sherman Watson. And already, by 1836, Sherman Watson had discovered by Heckenwelder's recount that, alas, the burial must have been of some other chief. Also, look at this fun little doodle. Yeah. So the plot thickens. Here is a letter saying from Albert Cook Myers in Philadelphia on Locust Street. He's working with Dr. Mercer, Henry Mercer, in 1924. And he says he has a letter written by Watson, and it's this letter that we were just looking at. And he says Watson makes a rather astounding quotation from Heckenwelder about Tamenend having lived several years in Nazareth after the Moravians lovated there, and that he was shot dead by an Irishman. But then he says, as explaining the final statement, he doubtless got Tamenend confused with Tatamy, whose son John Tatamy was shot by some member of the provincial forces in 1757. Okay. So then they looked through Heckenwelder and they found no, Dr. Mercer and this man Myers looked through Heckenwelder's publications and found no mention of Tamenend as living in Nazareth or elsewhere. And so they think it looks like Watson misquoted Heckenwelder's notes, or Watson quoted Heckenwelder's notes of Tademe as he spelled the name of the old Mosa Tadtemi, reading it as Tamenend. Heckenwelder does give Tatemy credit for giving advice to the Moravians and says he was killed by a foolish young white man. Watson does not use the data. So there you go. It seems like this whole thing was maybe a misunderstanding, right? Let's move on. Okay, now we come to this document, and it says here, this is from 1747, that the Delaware Indians last year intended to visit Philadelphia, but were prevented by Alumapis sickness, who's still alive but not able to stir. They will come this year sometime after harvest. Alumapis has no successor of his relations, and he will hear of none so long as he is alive, and none of the Indians care to meddle in the affair. Shikellamy, who we know is the leader of the Oneida and the Susquehanna, or lived on the Susquehanna River, right? Advises that the government should name Alumapis' successor and set him up by their authority, that at this critical time there might be a man to apply to, since Alumapis has lost his senses, and is incapable of doing anything. So what do we mean by he's lost his senses? Well, another footnote states that it was Alumapis to whom David Brainerd referred as having visited in September 1747. In the discussion over the successor to Alumapis before his death, Weiser says, Lapepitan was the fittest person. Alumapis was keeper of the great wampum. That's cool. He was much addicted to drink and spent large amounts of the public funds for gratification of his passion for intoxicants. So it sounds like Alumapis had lost his senses because he was an alcoholic, and he could not make it to this treaty, and he would not name a successor because he was probably stubborn, right? And next we have a document that says Tamenend versus Alumapis. Sasunan, also known as, or Alumapis, they're the same, Sasunan or Alumapis, and not Tamenend, the Indian chief buried at Spruce Hill. Spruce Hill is Prospect Hill. And we go all the way down. Now there's a footnote here that I can't quite read. It says, in this I made an error in the site in something. I can't read it. Where is it really? In New Britain? I can't read that, but they're talking about the site of the grave. When we come down here, it sort of comes together. Suffice to say that a distinct doubt has always, or at least frequently, been in the minds of our historians as to the identity of the great chiefs so buried. These doubts have always been shared by the author of these lines, and he has always been on alert for facts of history. Okay. Tamenend was succeeded by king of the Delaware tribe by Shikaliki, who died in 1713, and succeeded by Alumapis, also known as Sasunan, who died in 1747. Alumapis was long popular and successful ruler of the tribe. He did not have a strong attachment to the whites as the great Tamenend, who known personally William Penn. And then it says, the great curse of the Indian was his love of ardent spirits, and the leaders among them had long endeavored. Okay, and so turning the page. So this is a key part, by the way, and it was finally decided by the prominent Delawares that this practice could be better controlled by permitting its sale only to the chief, meaning selling rum. So Alumapis, under this plan, Alumapis, who was keeper of the wampum, was abundantly supplied with firewater, and having the same love of it as his followers in his latter days, became a confirmed drunkard. So basically, Alumapis would have resigned his crown before now, but that he had the keeping of the wampum with which he buys liquor, meaning he was the chief, he was the only one who was buying liquor, and has been drunk for this 2 or 3 years, almost constantly, and it is thought he would do so long as there is 1 penny of wampum left in the bag. Okay. So you can pause and read this as you wish. So basically, it's clear that he was left on Prospect Hill because he was unfit to travel further and appear before the provincial authorities. But there is no record of a delegation before the authorities at that date, meaning 1747, of course, but being unaccompanied by any person of authority, anyone of authority, they naturally, meaning the Indians, naturally would not have been received. And possibly knowing that they could not accomplish anything, they may have turned back, hoping to find their chief sufficiently improved or sobered to continue the journey. So, the circumstances and dates coincide so fully with the traditional story that I am fully convinced that the chief so buried was Alumapis. And here we go. So, Professor Max Schrabisch of Paterson, New Jersey, said in Wayne and Pike counties indicates that the last days of St. Tammany were spent in that locality, and Schrabisch feels sure he has discovered the actual place of his burial. Interesting. Tamenend was always of a... I can't read this. And it was natural that when he died, for the king, he was to... I don't know what that says. The fact that the delegation of Indians who carried their chief over the usual route from the headquarters of the tribe to Philadelphia on a diplomatic mission in 1747 or anywhere near the date mentioned in the tradition precludes all possibility of the chief of having been Tamanend, who had no diplomatic authority at that date, and all of the circumstances point to and fit in with the proposed trip in 1747 so perfectly that I am convinced it is Alumapis who was buried at Prospect Hill at that date, having committed suicide in his rage at being left being left there by his brethren, or by his braves, his people, right? So, where does that leave us? It seems that the grave on Prospect Hill is Alumapis' grave. And the story is that Alumapis had the wampum that allowed him to buy liquor. And as a drunkard, an alcoholic, he was not willing to give up that power, the wampum, because giving that up would mean giving up his exclusive access to alcohol. And he was so drunk that at a scheduled treaty in 1747, at a scheduled meeting in Philadelphia, he couldn't make it to Philadelphia. They had tried the year before, and he had lost his senses in 1747. And his people carried him as far as Doylestown and Prospect Hill, but he was so slow going, it sounds like. And he was ill and sick from the alcohol, probably, that they were late to the meeting. And so it sounds like the other Lenape left him on the hill in order to rush ahead to the meeting. But when they arrived, they weren't received by the white men because they didn't have a leader who could speak for all Lenape. You know, Alumapis being the leader, he was needed at the meeting. And so they were probably turned away. And when they returned to Prospect Hill by that time, Alumapis, as we see in this very first document, let me show you again. This very first document, it says, let me flip the camera around. They were compelled to leave him and hasten on to the treaty to be held the next day. The old chief was left with his daughter in a wigwam near the spring, where he was buried. Such was the chagrin at being thus deserted by his followers, and his mortification at not being able to attend the treaty, that he attempted to set fire to his wigwam. but frustrated in that attempt, he sent his faithful daughter to the spring for some water, presumably to put the fire out, and during her absence, plunged his knife into his own heart and expired. So, that's probably the story. And next I'll go visit the gravesite on Prospect Hill. It's probably not Tamenend. It's probably Alumapis. But we'll go pay our respects. Because after all, he's a Sachem. Alumapis was a Sachem in direct line from Tamenend. Yeah. Okay. Okay, folks, I think I found a map here. It says May 1910. Hard to read that, honestly. But just here is Bristol Road, and then this is Upper State Road. Upper State Road. And this must be a little ways down. And there it is. These are, I think, old surveyor recordings. So we need a reference point to find this plot. But that little square must be the grave. And this would have been a plot that Henry Mercer sold to or had the Bucks County Historical Society purchase. I don't think they own it anymore, but that's where we're gonna go today. Like, a little more maps. List of ownership, maybe? And here's another bit, so you can see it's sort of where Upper State Road curves, right? And then there's the plot. I think this is where he wanted to put the turtle statue. Henry Mercer wanted to put a turtle statue there, I believe. Let's keep going. Ah, look at this. Okay. So here's Upper State Road. And that right there says spring. So there was a spring, and then the spring had a creek. And the grave on bank. Grave on bank. 100 feet from this side and 80 feet from Upper State Road. Amazing. So that's what we'll look for. We'll try to go to Upper State Road about midway along this 200-foot area, and then we'll go 80 feet in to the head of the spring. Now, from Google Maps, I think this whole area is sort of a swamp now, but it does say there's high ground here. So let's see what we can find. This collection is called Briefs of Title to Tammany Graveyard. Okay, so we're leaving the Mercer Museum. Found out what we could, and now, sort of realized the grave we're looking for is probably not Tamenend's grave, but we're gonna go look for it anyway. It's I'll get the name right. Sasunan, the Sachem Alumapis. We're gonna go try and find it. All right. Thanks to the Mercer Museum for all their help.